Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mike Ames Recruitment Show, and we've got a great one today. We are going to talk about how to set up a contracts desk, and in a second, I'm going to get Mike to introduce our guest. But what I will tell you in advance is today might be a slightly longer show because we've got a lot to cover, and we want to make sure that we give every subject enough value for you so you can get something from it. So, without further ado, Mike, would you like to introduce our guest for the day?
Yes, I would. Welcome, Mr. Andrew Hallett, previously of SThree, commercial director, I believe, during that time. Big job, obviously, and we wanted him to come on the show specifically because of his knowledge of contract desks. And this is quite an interesting show normally, because when I normally have guests on, I know nothing about what they're talking about. It's a complete mystery to me, like most of life. But in this case, I've got a different experience of contracts. So we thought it would be really good to bring my experience, which is small business predominantly, with Andy's, which is a range of things, but he's got that big business, the things that they do, the things you watch out for that you pick up in big businesses. So bring that together on the show about setting up a contract desk. So welcome, Andy. Really good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be on it at long last. Only taken me 2 years to get round to invite me on. So
we have a list. You know, you didn't send me any chocolates at Christmas. You know, what can I say? And it's safe to say as well, Andy, that you have a portfolio of companies, don't you, that you work on around the recruitment and tech space. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. So two businesses. So an advisory business, which I set up, Expand, which I help, amongst other things, help businesses set up contract desks, contract businesses, and a network group where we've got a group of approximately 700 recruiters in a peer-to-peer network called Required, which I've co-founded with my friend's daughter in Charlotte. And again, that keeps us very current in the industry.
Dwelter's a big friend of the show, so we're very keen on that. One more thing as well, just for those viewers who are wondering. Andy's complaining because it's 38 degrees where he is, because he's in South Africa. So if the signal looks a little bit dodgy from time to time, it's coming a long way, is all I can say. Over to you, Kirsty.
Yes. So as I mentioned, today we are going to do a little bit longer. So as you go through, we're going to start in a second. If you've got any questions that you want to throw at Andy or Mike, as always, please put them in the comment section and I will bring them up. If we don't get time to do it at the beginning, then I will make sure that Andy's graciously offered to answer them for us at the end. So without further ado, the first question is a pretty standard one, I feel like, but I want to start the show off right, which is, why bother with a contract desk? Why is it such a great thing to have, Andy?
Well, I think the thing about a contracts desk is it's the logical first starting place to build a contracts business. So I think you've probably got to look bigger picture as to why you'd want to do contracts business. And for me, there's a number of reasons. I've always done contracts, so I'm incredibly biased. I entered the industry in 1999. Joining it just when the Millennium Bug was being fixed and the industry needed lots and lots of contractors. So I've been a contract recruiter, I've been a commercial director responsible for contracts, and for me, it's just a business for all seasons. And the thing I like most about contracts is its predictability. And actually, when you're building your business, I think a lot of business owners will come to find that predictability of contract is really powerful and important. What I mean by that essentially is that with contract, you spread your revenue, you build your revenue, you grow your revenue. If you're a contract consultant, you start January the 1st with a portfolio of runners. You don't start on zero. You can afford to take longer term decisions. And you're not constantly, starting at zero every month, which is such a powerful thing. In terms, and it works, I think, both for consultants, and I think it also works for business owners equally as well. So yeah, I mean, for me, a business for all seasons.
Can I just add a couple of things to that? Having sold a couple of contract businesses, I'm telling you now, they're viewed in a much more valuable way by potential buyers for the reasons that Andy's just said. You've got this continual revenue stream stretching out into the future. I think growth can be very quick. And one of the big benefits of contract, and we're going to talk about this a little later, is that you can reuse the contractors. So you spend time building a relationship with the candidate, you place them, and pretty much usually that's that. You may track them a little bit if they're a potential decision maker, but all that effort in building the relationship with the candidate has gone. With the contractors, we spent more money per contractor head than building a relationship with them, taking them out for dinners and lunch and beers, than we did with our clients. I mean, that's how much effort we put into the contractors that we had, because you can reuse that relationship. You'll use them several times over, which is a really cool thing. Couple that with, one of the reasons that you do have a more valuable business is because of that reuse. And to me, like Andy, I'm biased. I've done contract all my life, and I think it's definitely something worth putting a toe in the water with.
Okay, fantastic. So what I was going to go on to next was the sort of risks of a contract desk then, because you guys have both sung the praises of contracts very well. So why is it that not everybody's got one? Why would you not have one, Andy?
I think there is it's an investment, and we'll come on to talk about what you need to invest in. I think there's more complexity in it, but actually that's positive as well, because it creates a bit of a moat. I think it's more difficult to set up than a permanent desk and a permanent business, and for the reasons I'll explain. First and foremost, contract tends to be a bit more cash consumptive, or significantly more cash consumptive. So when you hire a contractor, you'll pay the contractor, and they'll pretty much want to be paid within 7, 14, 28 days. And then you've got to get the money out to the client, which can be anything from 28, 45, 60 days. So at any given time, you're funding that contractor and you're putting that out there. There's mitigations you can do. There's a lot of invoice discounts. You can go and get a big loan from the bank. You can take investment, but it's very cash consuming. And to get that cash coming back into your business is a big outlay. There's regulation as well. In the sense that, when you've got things in the UK like R35, you've got to make sure that your contracts are tight so you don't end up effectively employing the contractor, making a mistake. And there's lots of other things. You'll take on liability with the customer. When you make a permanent introduction, you'll say, "Hi, here's Mike Ames. He's great. Mike will turn up. He'll blow up the server or whatever." But that's the client's problem. If they do it on your watch and they're your contractor, then suddenly, the liabilities are big out of chain. So you've got to make sure that your contractors are properly qualified, insured, etc., and your contracts protect you from those type of things. So there's a number of different things that you need to set up and go through and get right. If you're starting a permanent desk, you can sit there in your pants with a LinkedIn subscription, an Excel spreadsheet, an email account, and just be firing off with no regulation, no license, no cash out. Bit more difficult on contract. You've got to have that, that infrastructure. Correct.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Mike, do you have anything else to add on there?
I just want to build on a couple of things that Andy said. Cash flow is a big deal, especially if it's your business. So this isn't somebody else's money. This is your money. We could only buy ourselves cars when the business tailed off a little bit, because the cash catches up and suddenly we got some cash. I remember once, because there's big risks attached to this, perm, if you put an invoice in and they don't pay, well, you've lost the value of that invoice, no real costs associated with it. We were in for £250,000 to a small software house providing a service. They were building a product for IBM, and we thought that was safe. Boy, were we wrong. IBM cancelled the project. They were really cheesed off with the software house and said, "We're just not paying your bills, mate." And we were in for £250,000. In other words, we paid out to the contractors that much, but we hadn't had that in. Had they not settled their bills, which they did in the end, we would have gone bankrupt. We were massively profitable on paper, but the cash would have run out like that. One bad decision. So you really have to manage your contractor estate really carefully. It's not just about cash, getting the debt insured, a whole bunch of other things that you need to do, but manage the contractor estate so that you haven't got too many eggs in one basket, because it can have a dramatic difference to your business. Lose one big account, you can lose, a quarter of your revenue overnight. Something to be managed.
Wow.
Very much
okay.
so. I've been on the end of the call when we had 20 contractors at Enron, Lehman Brothers, all these big companies that you don't expect to go wrong, and it happens. But you're right. I think the nice thing is, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Manage your risk, manage your portfolio. if you can, there's products that allow you, if you do, have certain reliance on, those sort of super customers, get credit insurance so that, that balance sheet, reckon you can't afford to risk your whole business. And there's a technical term for when the business unwinds. It's called a positive cash hedge. So basically, if you lose 1,000 contractors and they disappear off your balance sheet, it returns you all that cash. So actually, in terms of being recession-proof, what's the one thing you need when there's a downturn in the industry? Businesses, we saw it in the pandemic, businesses just become we want cash. Cash is king. So actually, as your contract book unwinds, it basically throws off cash to your business. So another good reason why contracts business for all seasons.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, we could only buy ourselves new cars when the contractor numbers went down because the money kept coming in and we weren't paying it out. But I think that's a very good point that you raised there. Just because you've got a big name doesn't necessarily mean to say they're going to pay the bills, and it doesn't necessarily mean to say that they're going to go bankrupt like Enron or like like Lehman Brothers. There are all sorts of reasons, and management of that estate is crucial, and management of your clients as well, I think, is important.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're going to go into that a little bit later.
Sorry, just one more thing on that. Margins for perm. I don't believe in low margins, but if you do like a low fee and you think, oh, well, for perm, I'll just do that then. If you have too lower margins on contract, again, that can actually bring you down because the amount that you're paying out, plus all the costs that go with it, an extended payment period, which they'll often do. We were going to pay you on 60 days. Well, we're not now. We're paying you on 90 days. You can do nothing about that except draw your contractors out. And that can change everything. So you've got to have good margins, massively important.
Okay. So, we have sort of briefly touched on the differences between the contract and perm there as well. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight between the difference between the two before we start moving on to actually how we set up a contract desk? Andy, is there other differences between contract and perm you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, the way I try and explain it to people who haven't experienced contracts or are new to the industry, it's a bit like rugby union or rugby league. Okay, they're both rugby. To the naked eye, you both kick in the wrong shaped ball around, and for me, it's just a different code. So permanent's very much around effectively getting someone, making sure this is the right move for their career, making sure that the salary is correct, location, the whole family's bought into the move, etc., etc. Generally takes a bit more time. Contract, can you do the job? Can you get it done? For 3-6 months. If it doesn't, if I don't love it, it's not great. It doesn't matter. I've got another contract in 3-6 months. Same for the hirers as well. So I think I've heard it quite crudely described as contracting is an affair, not a marriage. I think the other thing to recognise is where you get your fee as well. So on permanent, you're effectively working for the employee. So we can get you 50, 60,000. I'll get my 20% of that. So the more I get you, the more I get myself. On contract, you're a broker. So you're trying to get as much from the client as possible, and you're ideally trying to get a contractor who's good enough to do it on the most amenable rate to yourself, because you get what's in the middle. So you're effectively, I think on permanent, you're an agent. On contract, you're a broker. And I think it's a very subtle difference there. Okay,
fantastic. Thanks, Andy. Mike?
I think that's spot on. Yeah, I want to expand upon what Andy just said. That's a really important point. With perm, you're kind of more aligned to the client. You've got to find the candidate and look after them and treat them properly and make sure the match is good, of course. But you've really got one client. In contract, you've got two clients. And for us, the single biggest source of new clients, and these were big clients, don't forget, not small ones, were the contractor community that we served. We invested more time into our contractors per head than we did our clients, as I said earlier. And what that does is build a bunch of contractors that are loyal to you, and given the choice between going with someone else or going with you, they'll go with you. And you can even pick up clients from contractors who are working through another agency. We picked up a company called RS Components, quite a big company back in the day, because one of our ex-contractors was working there. They were struggling to find somebody, and he just said to his boss, "Oh, you want to bring Mike Ames?" think he can help you. And they actually rang in because this guy had actually said, well, you should try them. So if you invest heavily in your contractor squad, they will repay that a lot, but you really do have to put a lot more effort in, and there's cost associated with it and time, of course. And you want people that see the contractors as a value, not just as a commodity to whack in, make some money and then forget about them. That's not how to grow a very profitable contracts desk at all.
Okay, fantastic. So we are in a second going to get to the meaty bit, which I'm sure everybody watching wants to know, which is the setting up a contracts desk, how you actually do it. But we've got a question, sort of, or a statement, I guess, which I'd like your opinion on, which is, do you think it's a difference between the people that you hire as your consultants? Do you think there's a difference between a contractor consultant and a more perm consultant? Andy, I'm gonna come to you on this. Do you think there is?
Good question, Gavin. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think there is. I don't necessarily think it's higher. I think it's the way they're trained. So, and again, if you start playing, to go back to my rugby league or rugby union, that's the way you'll be conditioned. And I think the way you're trained, the way you see the role is different. I think contract feels, for me, a lot faster paced. If you don't fill the contract within hours, then chances are someone else will. Whereas permanent, it's more around that sort of that right fit. And I think it's that fast brokering, but perhaps with less empathy, perhaps with, I think the other thing is as well, contract consultants have to be more imprecise or less precise, rather than, as well. It's about finding the person who can do the job, not the perfect person for the job. Whereas often on permanent, I think you're looking for that permanent. So to answer your question, Gavin, I think when you come to hire, no, I don't think there's a difference. I think you can bring people on. I've seen great salespeople be successful at contract. I've seen great administrative, very detailed, data-driven people be great at contract. I think it's just how they're trained and conditioned at the start. And I think I've very rarely seen people certainly go from permanent to contract. A few times I've seen people go from contract to permanent with some degree of success, but for me, it's always been rare to see that if someone's started in one discipline versus the other, and then I'm sure we'll come on to should you dual desk later as well, Mike, as well. So for me, Gavin, really simple answer to your question: no difference when it comes to hire, but after you've trained, there is a difference for me.
Okay, fantastic. Mike, very, very quickly, do you have anything to say on this?
I think what Andy said is probably the case. I do genuinely wonder, though, whether there are certain traits within individuals which would make them more successful in the contract arena. Like there is that, if you're too much of a perfectionist, and that's a very good point you raised, Andy, if you're too much of it has to be right, if that's in your nature, probably not going to make a tremendously good contract recruiter. I think the other thing is and this is an inherent thing, successful contract recruiters, the ones that make the big money over a long period of time, are relationship driven. Relationships with their clients, and we'll talk about that in a second, and relationships with their contractors. And perm, you don't need that so much, really, because it's quite reactive, or it can be quite a reactive environment. So I think if you're looking for someone that really gets relationships, understands what it means to invest in people, and then see that reward sometime later on, and they've got that, well, let's just get it done mentality, I'm wondering whether that would make a difference, actually.
Okay, fantastic. So we've had a comment from Martin that he really sort of likes that premise, Andy. So I think, thank you very much for your comment, Martin. I'm glad you're agreeing. So as I mentioned, we're about to move on. If you have any questions as we go through this next step about how to set it up, please do mention them, and I will bring them up with Mike and Andy to answer as we go. And if I don't answer it there, we'll stay at the end until we have all questions answered. So guys, the big question that I'm sure we've got a lot of people watching for is, how do I actually do it? So you've convinced me a contract desk is the way forward for me. I like all of the benefits and I can handle some of the drawbacks. What do I do? What's my first step? Where do I start?
You take a deep breath and you realise how much you're prepared to chuck into it. I mean, I think it literally is as simple as that. That it's an investment. You need to treat going into contracts as an investment. It's an investment because I think as we talked about, there's the cash investment. I think there's an opportunity cost if you're running a successful permanent business. Then it's all going well. Then actually you could have put that investment into your successful perm business. So I think you've got to realise that there is an investment doing it. I think if you've not done contract before and you're wanting to build a contract desk, and again, I'll say it again, contract desk to breed a contract business, I'd bring someone in who has done it before. I wouldn't advocate learning the discipline of building a contract business on your own. Bring someone in who's either worked in a successful contract business or has built a successful contract business. So just be mindful of the fact that there's a cost and a real cost. The second thing as well is that have the courage of your convictions. I see so many businesses putting off contract businesses, building those contract desks. If I had a quid for every recruitment company that said, I wish I had a contracts business in March 2020 when we were coming out of the pandemic, I probably could have retired by now. But I still go back and think, actually, how many have actually started? Because when their businesses did come back, there's never a good time to start. Because your business is either doing really badly, so you need to work on that, or your business is doing really well and you don't want to distract from it. So I think there's never a good time to start it. It's the classic. When was the best time to plant a tree? Well, it's 20 years ago. When's the next best time? It's now. Yeah. So for me, it's about realizing investment and just starting.
Yeah. Okay, getting yourself in that headspace, I guess, of understanding that's what you want to do. Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Mike, do you have?
In a second, or when I get my turn and Kirsty brings me in, because she's chat master, obviously, I'm going to go through a quick start for contract desks. It's obviously a very simplified version that I'm going to show you on the screen because we've only got limited amounts of time, but it is a quick start and we've used it. I've used it with clients and we used it years ago to sort of start in new areas. So it's a kind of a quick start, but that put to one side, I think it's the money, it's the cash flow. I've seen a lot of people start a contracts desk almost by accident, really. Client says, hey, can you get me a contractor? Well, okay, then. So they find a contractor and they put them in and they either try and negotiate payment terms so that they can afford it, or they think, yeah, well, we've got some cash in the bank, we can afford this. And I suppose that's kind of okay. But if you're going to do it properly, you have to have a line of credit because it's not an overdraft. This is a confidential invoice discounting or factoring, those kind of services, which will expand as you expand. And not doing that sometimes means you have to turn down pieces of work because you can't afford it. Or worse, you've got a piece of work, but you can't then finance it halfway through, which is dreadful. I've seen that happen and it's awful. So I think to investigate the credit providers for contract is a good thing to do. Now, Andy, you've got some experience in that. There are quite a few good providers of credit now, aren't there, on the contract front?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much an evolving market, but I think we partnered up with SThree, who are pretty much the industry leaders. A couple of my ex-colleagues actually, and actually I think they've probably changed the industry in terms of it used to be the classic bank. You'd have to go to your bank and you'd have to actually explain what recruitment was and explain that you didn't actually employ these people, you were just sort of brokering them. I think what companies like SThree have done is they've really sort of changed the game in terms of just making it easy. So they'll come on, they'll do your invoicing for you, they'll collect the money, effectively they'll pay you a margin, so you can you're not using your cash, but you're getting the benefit of the profit. So I think certainly to start. And then as you really sort of grow and scale, those companies are really powerful and important. So
can we just dig in? Can I ask a few questions about that on behalf of the viewers? So, okay, so there's a contract, say a contract invoice to go in and it's £1,000, right? Because we can work on that. So you would send that to the client and Sonovate, or you would send that to Sonovate, or how would that work?
Well, there's a number of different ways of doing it, but there are varying different ways. You can either have effectively them act in your name, or you can effectively just pass it, and they'll run that as a back office service. Other services are available. But it's pretty much what works with your customer and what works for you. Effectively, though, what they're doing is they are lending to you and paying you for the value that they are going to receive, or the value you're going to receive, and they accept it on your behalf effectively.
So you pay out. So you send them a bill for £1,000, an invoice. They pay the £1,000 within a couple of days, I guess. Then within 7 days or whatever it is, you pay the contractor. So you're basically not out of pocket on the invoice, are you? Basically.
Yeah, well, they'll do it, so you don't even have to appear in the chain. So there's numerous different ways of doing it. So potentially, they'll pay your contractor, and then they'll just claim the money back from the client, and they'll pay you your margin in the middle. So you're not actually exposed from doing it. So from there are ways of doing it, and effectively mirroring to what your client's requirements are.
And so just to go through, people have never done this. So, okay, that's great. That's all paid. Contractor's been paid. You've got the dosh, effectively got the margin in your bank. Awesome. And then is there a period that if they haven't paid the bill, the provider would say, well, we want our money back now. It's like, 90 days or something. They haven't paid the bill, but we want our cash back. Or does it go on forever, or how does that work?
It really depends on the deal you sign up for. I mean, it's the classic risk reward. If you want it fully insured and fully credit backed, and it's their risk, then you're going to pay a lot higher. There are different providers out there that will. It really comes down to your risk appetite as a business. You've got literally complete full risk where you're financing it with your own money or a bank loan, or you're effectively getting someone else to do it and sit in your seat. They've obviously got the benefit of that broad portfolio, so they potentially can take that risk, or they've backed it off with credit insurance. So for me, I think one of the key things that comes out is, what's your appetite for risk? What is your appetite for? And it may well be different. I always use IBM as a good example of someone who would pay, but clearly not in your experience, Mike. But are you dealing with the government, who do generally pay, or are you dealing with a startup with no money? You might have a different attitude to risk in that sense.
So can you have different deals for different clients? Like if I was dealing with IBM or Microsoft, you know what? I think they're going to pay. I think it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. But if I'm dealing with this small software house, perhaps not so much. So the same provider of credit, you can have different deals per client. Does it work like that?
Yeah, I mean, potentially you're looking at different, they might load for riskier clients, but I think what the good providers will do is they'll look at the balance of what it is you're looking to achieve and work with you on that sort of basis.
Okay, 2 last questions on this for you, because I think a lot of people, I've had a lot of questions around this myself, so I know people are interested, and they should be, to be honest. Mm-hmm. Do the providers dictate how much business you can do with one client? I mean, would they be okay if you had all your business in one client, or do they make it spread it out, or how do they see things around that?
It does depend on the provider, but most will give you a credit line. They'll give you a credit limit that, this is what we're prepared to lend against, this company. And I mean, it's not an area I'm hugely familiar with, if I'm honest, because you say I worked at SThree, so we pretty much just self-funded, so it was never an issue. But the same protocols for our self-funding applied. We used to assign credit limits to customers, and ultimately, if we were to bounce over those credit limits, someone, you'd go up the chain and someone pretty senior would have to sign up. If people weren't paying the bills and we went to extend contractors, extending is a really good time to assess, do we want to continue this risk? But also it's a real opportunity with the client to say, sorry, that guy that's holding up your website right now can't continue past 2 or 3 weeks because we've not been paid. And actually it's a real opportunity to go and have those engagements with customers. So for me as well, whether or not you're self-funding or whether or not you're doing it through a provider, the principle's the same. How much are we prepared to risk against this client? are they paying, and what leverage do we have if they're not?
I think that's an important point to remember. If you're setting up a desk, it's really important that with perm, you can pretty much do as much as you want with whoever you want. It's absolutely fine. You don't think about that. You think about fulfilling the vacancy. With contract, you have got this other dimension to the decisions you make, and that's around money, really. So in the past, I remember we had to go to Barclays Commercial Services. They provided an invoice discounting service. So basically, the clients didn't know that we were using them. We owned the sales ledger and chase debts and so on. And we got the chance of a huge project at Severn Trent Water. I mean, it's like a several £1 million, I think, over the lifetime of the contract. But that would have blown out the Severn Trent Water limits, and we had to go to them and beg and plead for them to extend it so that we could take the contract on. And had we not been able to do that, we would have had to have said to the client, we can do that, but we can't do it. And it's an extra consideration. You're much more actively managing things than you do with perm. And if you don't do that, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. Okay. One last question on this, and then I know Kirsty wants to move on, but in terms of fees that you would expect to pay, I know what you're going to say. It's like, depends that, the more you get from them, the more you pay. What are the typical limits, kind of lower and upper limits on what you would expect to pay as a percentage of the invoice value to a company like Sonovate or whoever?
You'll be looking, generally low percent. I would have thought, I've seen fees 6 or 7, but generally a lot lower than that. So, and there's going to be a number of factors. How much you put it through. Obviously, there's a volume. There's risk appetite. It really is how long's a piece of string. What I would say is that it is a relatively competitive market. So work out which provider works best for your business, and ultimately there's a mixture. The other thing that does potentially complicate it as well is that you've got things like the service. So what else are they doing? Are they managing your back office? Are they managing the timesheets? Are they doing those things as well? So it's not just as clear as a simple number.
We negotiated a deal. Well, I didn't do it myself, but I was working with someone setting up a contract desk last summer, and you're right. They had, I think, the lowest was 2.75%, up to about 5.5%. But I would say this: 2 things to anyone thinking of doing it. First of all, shop around, right? Yeah. But be careful. They're not apples. They're not apples and apples. You're comparing apples and pears. So be careful. Right. Whatever you buy, there'll be a cost associated with it. Make sure when you get quotes from different clients, they're quoting for the same thing. But shop around and negotiate. They all come down. They all come down. There was one, I won't mention their name, but they were pitching in at 3.5. I think it was 3.75, and they came down to less than 3 with negotiation. So, it's like anything else, negotiate. But once that's in, it's in. And get the right thing that suits you. And I entirely agree with Andy. Risk and exposure to risk is really important, because it can bring down a very healthy business if you get the money wrong.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so I have got a couple of questions, but I think I'm going to hold that up to the end. And Mike, is now the time for you to discuss your...
Yeah, sure. I can go through this real quick, because I know we are still going to try and pitch it to 3/4 of an hour, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So this, I'm going to explain to you now a way that you can set up a contract desk, almost not as an experiment, but to get you in, really. And then you can then look at it again and perhaps reformalize it and make it a little more scalable. Let's put it that way. But it's a model that we've used in the past. And quite frankly, we used it even when we had a big business. My business was 40 million quid in the 90s. So 65 million quid now, I think. And we did this squad approach then. It was the thing that we did. Generally speaking, when you're starting off, there's the difference. So with permanent recruitment is a service. If you take me on, I will find some candidates and present it in this way, and you pay me for that. In the squad approach, you're actually you're not selling a service, you're selling a squad of contractors. They're usually all in the same discipline. You've been through and you've checked them out and you've spoken to them, because you can take references on contractors, which you can't do on permanent. It's a big difference. So you can speak to other contractors they will have worked for. You can speak to previous companies that they've worked for. You ask permission before you do it. It's only good manners to do that. But we would never use anyone unless we check them out, ever. ever. So you're a lot more confident when you're presenting your contractors because you've got a three-dimensional view of them. So you start off with a squad, and you can have as many people as you like in the squad really before you actually start actively selling it. But it depends on the discipline, anywhere between 50 and 100 contractors. So the first thing is to find your discipline, which is not that difficult. It's something that's quite narrow. It's something that you can specialize in. Obviously, there is a contract market for it, and preferably at least one of your clients actually uses that skill on contract. Okay, so that's the first thing. Trial and error perhaps to get it right, but ours back in the day was IBM mainframe, specifying in 3 different products that sat on the mainframe. Means nothing to most of you. Don't even know what a mainframe is. I'm even embarrassed to talk about mainframes, but there you go. Then you spend time building the contractor squad. I'm actually doing this now with a client, and we're using some Indians to actually build it. So they're locating contractors, they're registering them. Then we do it the other way around. We have a level 1 assessment, then we contact them. Then we have a level 2 assessment, and then we can start to check them out. Now it is time consuming, but there's no cost really, or very little cost. It's just time. So you can do this over a period of time, 6 months, if you will, to build the squad, because you're selling the squad. You're not selling the service. Big difference there. Next stage is you go to your existing clients and say, look, here's the thing. We've built this squad of contractors. They've all been checked out. We've taken references on everybody. We've interviewed everybody. We know when everyone's finish date is, right? It's the squad you're buying. When you get a contract requirement, would you be happy to give us a go? And if the relationship is strong, almost certainly the answer will be yes. But what you can also do is you can spec offer the contractor to their previous assignments when they were working through another agency. There are risks associated with that, and I could spend the next 10 minutes just talking about that. But essentially what you're doing is saying, okay, that contractor worked as a contractor at that site. So I know they take contractors. Many times the contractor, if you ask them, will tell you who their manager was. They're very free and easy with information in most cases. And then that means I can ring them up and say, look, we've got so-and-so and so-and-so coming up. Would you be interested in taking them back? Now, if you do that with people that don't know you, there is a chance that they'll just ring up the previous agency and say, I gather so-and-so and so-and-so is coming up. Could we have them back? But in many cases, people don't have a loyalty to the contract agency. And if you've got them, then they'll take them off you many oftentimes. Now, what you can do, and this is how we grew our business like massively, was if you track finish dates on your squad 6 weeks before the end date, you ring them up and say, look, you know, we're going to want to start and look for you. Can we go back to a few of the clients that you worked before and see if they take you back? And if the answer is yes, and it usually is because contractors just want to get a job, then you repeat step 4. And as time expands, you go back to clients that are clients of yours where you've placed that contractor, and that changes the game completely. Because the last thing you want to do when you're small is get requirements that everybody else has got for anything and its mother, and then hit the job boards or wherever, or LinkedIn, or you'll register. It's a nightmare. When you're bigger, absolutely fine. But when you're smaller, this is a really cool way to enter the market and corner that market, bags it, if you will. And I can thoroughly recommend it. I am going to talk about it a little bit more next week in next week's show, because it happens to come under the banner of that. So if you've got any questions on that, please ask them now. And if we can't answer them now, I'll certainly answer them in the comments. But this seriously is a great way, low cost way to get in there. Having said that, get your credit lines in place before you start, because if a lot of people say yes, you run out of money real quick.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic.
I do really like that approach, Mike. I think you've got to go niche. It's really, you can't be a generalist contract. If you want,
you can if you're SThree, but you can't if you're a small business, can you? You know.
But even then, there were very defined niches, and I think very good in certain areas and not so good in other areas. So there were companies who effectively had 10 times the amount of consultants on certain desks that we did, and guess what? They placed a lot more people because they have that strength in depth. Who are you going to go to? The one with 10 times more consultants and therefore 10 times more resumes, 10 times more experience. So I think the niche really, really helps. And otherwise, as you say, you're just chasing around filling jobs that everyone else is. You also lose credibility with contractors as well. They're busy people, generally. They get a lot of phone calls, and if you're effectively reading off a job spec and you don't understand, what the difference between Java and JavaScript is, for example, it's going to be a pretty short conversation, and you're not going to get a second chance with them. So what you've talked about is creating those squads where people feel confident talking to you, that if Andy Hallett rings you up or Mike Ames rings you up, they know that I'll take this call because he understands what I actually do. And that's incredibly powerful as well.
And you can make yourself first choice. That's what I like, because you've got to remember that contractors they come from a different budget than your headcount for permanent. It's different. Usually it's off the P&L and it's project based. So you can ring a client well before they've got a need and say, so-and-so's coming up. And they're thinking, if I take that contractor back, they're good. I know they're good because I've used them before. They've got a knowledge of the system, or they've got a knowledge of whatever it is that they've worked on. I'd want them back. I haven't got a need, but do you know what? I'll get some money. And I'll bring them back. Because what you want to do, if you're going to make big money, replicating next week's show now, is you want to get a requirement before it's issued. Because when, on average, we used to have my salespeople back in the day, my consultants, would be averaging 30 and 40 contractors each because of this model. Whereas if you're reactive, no chance of getting that far. No chance in a million years, unless you've got a really hot account or two, in which case that's different, obviously. But if you're trying to build up your accounts from scratch, this is the way to do it. Very much
Okay.
so.
I actually do have quite a good question, I think, that I want to bring in. And we are coming to the end now, guys. So if you have any more questions, please put them in the comments. Or if you're watching the recording as well, pop them in the comments as well. And Mike and Andy will look through and answer them as well as they can. So it's a question from Martin. If your sector that you're currently working perm in doesn't really have a contract aspect, do you have any advice about picking the market that they should differentiate into if you don't want to go into sort of saturated markets and things like that? Does either of you have any advice? Andy, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Yeah, I'd go for as close adjacency as you can. So, really good example, something like software sales. It's not really a contract market for that. But potentially, if your software company is you sell a lot into the cyberspace, then go and do the cyber tech side of things, which is a contract market. So don't decide to go into something completely different. So yeah, I think that's the advice I'd give. Go for as close as you can.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Very quickly as well, if I can just add to that, I agree with that. The tech side, contracting and tech go hand in hand. Now, that might be quite a distance away from where you are, so I don't really know, but higher level as well. We used to find that the lower level contractors, we made less money and they were way more hassle. We just stopped doing them in the end. The more senior, the interims, because the interim market is kind of like contract as well. Well, it is really, but the more senior the people, the better you'll do by a long chalk.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, they don't let you down. They turn up. They're adults. Yeah.
So things like finance as well. Finance is a good place to look. That they quite often get interim finance people going around the place. So, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I think it's about time for me to do a bit of a roundup. So for those of you who are new watching this, in a second, Andy, I'm going to come to you and come to the first thing that people should do, the small thing that they should do to start their contracting desk. But first, let me do a bit of a summation. So essentially, contracting is a great way of making your business a bit more recession proof. It's a really cash rich place to be, and I love that thing where if you lose people you end up with more money, which is sort of a nice thing to have.
Only
there
for
are
a bit,
only for a bit. I get that, but still it's a nice little boost. On the negative side, that there is an investment involved, and you have to get into that headspace with it. But essentially, the difference between the two is with perm, you're working for the client, whereas when you're contracting, you're very much kind of on the side of the contractor as well. So it's more of a split level. So to start your contract desk, first of all, you need to, as Andy said, get yourself in the headspace that you're going to do this, that there are some differences to perm and that you need to sort of change the way that you think a little bit. Then you need to figure out your line of credit. We talked a lot about this and about different places that you could look. And also Gavin made a point here, which is understand what you're paying your percentage on when you're paying these providers. Some people do it on margin, some people do it on turnover. So that's interesting.
And there's a difference between margin and markup as well. Check out for that one.
So that's
fantastic.
fantastic tips.
That myself in the past, yeah.
Oh, fantastic tips there. And then finally, I think the thing that I really took is from Andy was understand what your risk levels are. Understand what you as an individual and as a business are willing to risk on, because there is a different kind of risk on contract than there is in perm. Is there anything else, guys, that I've missed that you wanted me to summarize up, or does that seem quite fair?
Yeah, I'd say just start small as well. Go the squad route. It's the easiest way to enter for me.
Perfect. So, Andy, I now come to you. So people are watching.
Oh wait,
this
can I
thinking,
just do next week's show first?
Oh yeah, I was going to come to you at the end, but you can do next week's show now.
I want to finish on Andy. The big finish for Andy. That's what we want.
Okay. Go on.
I don't want to hog the limelight. Okay, very quickly. Next week, this was the turnover for the first of my contract businesses, and as you can see, it's like a game of two halves, really. You know, you got the first 5 or 6 years from nothing to, I don't know, 6.5 or whatever it was, and then the next 4 years from 6.5 to 40. There was a reason for that, and partly is what we were talking about today. But I'm going to go through exactly why that happened, because there are some great lessons that still apply today. Now, I'm not suggesting you can get that kind of growth, obviously, but I'm going to talk to you about the key elements of that transition in a business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. So, Andy, now I'm going to come to you. So people are thinking contract desks, the way I want to go. What's the very first thing they should do, as small as possible? What is the first thing that somebody needs to get right before they can start a contract desk?
First of all, they've just got to commit. They've got to understand the prize, what it's worth to them, commit, plant the tree. It really is as simple as that. You work it out the rest along the way, but be really clear why it is you're doing it. Have that target, and it will really, really help you in getting towards that goal.
Fantastic. So I like that headspace stuff. Okay. Thank you very much for the people who are here. Thank you very much for watching us today. It has been a bit of a longer show. Next week, we're going to go back to the half an hour. Thank you very much to Andy. It's been fantastic having you. You've been so much value for us, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, can I just echo? Yeah, thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure. It always is. I really like speaking to you. Thanks for coming on the show. See you next week, guys.
Thank you.